Okay, hello out there, internet world. I'm here to make a non-class based video today about how to pronounce the name of this city. And it's weird because suddenly my expertise in phonetics has become relevant to the world of current events because Russia has invaded Ukraine. And I happen to have a little bit of expertise in how to speak Ukrainian as a phonetician and also how to speak Russian a little bit too. Because my wife, it turns out, is Ukrainian, and she is a native speaker of both Ukrainian and Russian. So I thought I could have her just say the name of the city for you all so you know how it's pronounced. So to get to the short version of the story, I'll play that recording right now. So how do you pronounce the name of this city? It is
Kyiv,
like that.
Kyiv,
Okay, so that pronunciation involves a sound that we don't have in English, and I know there may be others of you out there who speak other languages that are not English, but either way, the way it's transcribed in the IPA is like this. And if you've taken my phonetics course, you should know how to actually say these various sounds, but if you haven't, I'm going to try to walk you through it from an English speaker's perspective. But yeah, so the way it's written in Ukrainian, we'll start from there, is using these four letters or characters in the Ukrainian writing system. I'll mention here along the way that Ukrainian spelling is based on the Cyrillic alphabet, but it is slightly different from the Russian alphabet, which is the version of the Cyrillic alphabet, which is probably more familiar for people out there in the world broadly. But Ukrainian has a few different symbols, including this third one, which looks like an I with two dots on the top. But I'll try to give you kind of the code here for how to kind of translate between Ukrainian and English. So the first symbol here, this is the capital version in Ukrainian, but it works just well with the lowercase. But it looks like a K and has the same phonetic value in both Ukrainian and English. My wife pronounces this as an aspirated K. That's actually something I wasn't entirely sure of before I recorded her,
Kyiv,
whether she would aspirate or not, but she does. And then the vowel right after that, from an English speaker's perspective, kind of looks like an N, but with the diagonal in the middle kind of oriented in a different way. So it looks, yeah, it's this vowel. That's the interesting vowel here because it's a barred I, and I'll explain more what that means on the next slide. But you might get this in a word like bridges, this short vowel in between the j and the z at the tail end of bridges. You might pronounce as a barred I. Otherwise, it doesn't exist in English. This I with two dots on the top of it is a kind of a diphthong-like sequence or a glide plus vowel sequence, yi, which I've written it out here as Y-E-E is sort of a phonetic, like sort of ad hoc phonetic way to write it in English. You could also think of it as sort of the Old English pronoun yi, Y-E. It's pronounced the same way, yi. It's just not that common of a sequence in English, but we can do it, right? And then this, which looks like kind of a uppercase B but smaller in Ukrainian, is the way they write a V. So the same sound that we would write with a V letter, that's just V. So it's Kyiv, Kyiv. I'm not a native speaker of Ukrainian. I learned Ukrainian because, well, not that long ago, but a few years ago, I fell in love with my wife. And I fell in love with the language too because it's a really cool one to learn. I knew some Russian before learning Ukrainian. That made it a little bit easier. But now I know more Ukrainian than Russian. I'm not a fluent speaker of either by any means. I have a rudimentary knowledge of Ukrainian and enough to know that it's not that easy to actually say this the way a Ukrainian speaker would if you're a native speaker of English. But again, it's
Kyiv,
Kyiv, like that. Okay, so the tricky part of this is this barred I vowel. And it's tricky for a couple of different reasons, quite frankly. Number one, we don't have it in the English phonemic inventory, so you're not used to saying it sort of in a stressed or sort of prominent sort of context. But also, it's interesting that when I look at other transcriptions of Ukrainian, like on the internet, people will typically transcribe this vowel as like an I vowel. Like the one we get in bit. So I'm looking at the Wikipedia page on this city. And if you look at, they have transcriptions here. Like this is their transcription of what my wife just said. And they actually use that cap I vowel right there. But that's not quite right. So what it is, it's closer to a barred I vowel. which may or may not exist in your variety of English. And so, like I said, for most Americans and Canadians, you might get it in unstressed vowels like the one written as an E in bridges in the second syllable of this word.
Bridges.
And this is me trying to say it with a barred I here in this unstressed syllable. So the stress mark here denotes the first syllable is stressed, the second is unstressed.
Bridges.
Just like that kind of vowel there. You can compare that with another pronunciation of the same word, which you might use as well. Instead of that barred I, you might use that cap I vowel. This sort of looks like a small capital I.
Bridges.
And because you're probably just used to listening to what the word means here and not the sort of phonetic sounds that get used in the word, you're probably not going to notice that much of a difference between these two pronunciations right away.
Bridges. Bridges.
But if you focus on that second vowel, you might be able to hear it.
Bridges. Bridges.
So I've just actually excised out the vowel itself so we can focus on that part of it. So this is me saying just that second vowel in the two different pronunciations. So this is the barred I, and this is the cap I. And you can compare me with my wife here. That's her vowel from the name of the city. It's like that. Okay, so since if I'm putting this out there, I don't know how familiar with phonetics you are. The I vowel, that cap I vowel, is the vowel that we have in a word like bit, or pit, or pick, or whatever. I, that vowel. To make the barred I vowel, what you want to do is try making that I, and then push the center of your tongue a little bit further back into your mouth, more like I. And it takes some practice to do that, but once you kind of get a sense or general feel of where things are in your mouth, you should be able to do that without too much difficulty. Usually the hard part is not producing it in isolation, but actually in a sequence of segments like in Kyiv, something like that. So sorry, try that again. Go back here. A little bit further back. In phonetics class, some of you of a certain age might appreciate this, but in phonetics class, I sometimes refer to barred I as like the Beavis and Butthead vowel, like the that vowel, like when they're laughing at music videos or making stupid jokes. That's barred I, basically. So if that means something to you, then great, go ahead and use it. Otherwise, where barred I might appear is it occurs in a specific set of phonetic environments in South African English. There's another, so cap I, where we normally have cap I in like American English or Canadian English. In New Zealand English also moves a bit, the tongue moves a bit further back for that, but it's not quite cap I, but that's another case where you might get it. Otherwise, South African English is a good example of it. And unfortunately, I don't have any good recordings of South African speakers producing this vowel. I'm making this kind of on the fly. I have examples of me pretending to be South African, imitating a South African friend I have whose name is Martin, but he doesn't say his name as Martin. He says it more like this.
Martin.
Martin. So he has that barred I vowel in the second syllable there, also unstressed.
Martin.
It can be stressed, though, in South African English. So Martin and I play ultimate frisbee. He's a good guy. He likes to play any chance he gets. We've played together in mixed tournaments, so men and women together. He doesn't say the word women, though. He says
women.
Something like that, because this I becomes more of a barred I for Martin as a South African speaker. And it's kind of funny, actually, when he says
women.
I'm always like, wait, it's more than one woman, not one woman. Why are you saying woman?
Women.
It's kind of straddles that boundary for me between I and as a vowel, and sometimes I get confused about what he's saying, but it's a barred I in that case.
Women.
And I really should get Martin to say these things for me, but for now you have to deal with me just trying to produce barred I. Anyways, this city, the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv, is basically if you pronounce it as Kyiv with a barred I or Kyiv, like they have transcribed in Wikipedia, I think any Ukrainian speaker is probably going to be fine with it if you do that, right? Because it kind of shows that you're trying to pronounce it the Ukrainian way. In my experience, I've been to Ukraine several times, and I have learned enough Ukrainian to get around and try to speak to people to some extent. And every time I do, people are just kind of astonished that in a lot of cases where I go, Americans are very rare animals to see in Ukraine. So first of all, they notice the fact that I'm American and they're like, what's going on there? And then second of all, if I speak Ukrainian, they're like, what the heck just happened? So if you see a Ukrainian, even if they're in Canada or the United States or wherever, and you try to speak Ukrainian, try to say it the Ukrainian way, they're probably going to be happy that you're doing that. And if you go the extra mile and learn some Ukrainian and start speaking to them in Ukrainian, then you're my hero. I think we've all found out in the past week or so how cool Ukrainians can be, how courageous they can be. It turns out they can, love you kind of intensely if you sort of become a member of the family as well. And so that's kind of a great feeling to have if you sort of put in that extra step to see the world and sort of speak about the world from their perspective and with their language. That being said, though, I'm going to add something else about Ukraine, which is interesting at the end of this video, which is the fact that the city Kyiv is actually a predominantly Russian-speaking city. So traditionally, we've referred to this city as Kyiv. At least that's the way I would normally say it in English. And why do we do that? Well, one of the reasons is that Kyiv is predominantly Russian-speaking. So it's kind of a funny fact that the capital of Ukraine the people in the capital of Ukraine would speak Russian rather than Ukrainian. There are interesting historical reasons for that, which I think I will make another video to talk about. But for now, I just say that, this might be changing, I think, given the current situation with Russia attacking Ukraine, but there are a lot of Russian speakers in Ukraine. And if you are speaking Russian, then this is the Russian name for the city. It's written like this in the Russian version of the Cyrillic alphabet. And I have my wife speaking or pronouncing this name here. My wife natively speaks both Ukrainian and Russian. Yeah, so that's not an uncommon situation in Ukraine either. But this is how she pronounces this version of the name.
Kyiv.
Right, and like I said, we would normally say Kyiv in English if we just write it out like this. It sounds fairly similar to the Russian pronunciation.
Kyiv.
One thing that's interesting, and which is an issue that often comes up when I teach intro phonetics, but it's how to pronounce the last consonant in this name. So it's written in the English transliteration with a V. It's using the same Cyrillic symbol, which looks like a small capital B. But what happens? So a V is a sound which you're making by curling your lower lip back underneath your upper row of teeth. V. And you're also producing a sound at your vocal folds here. You bring your vocal folds together so that they open and close rapidly. V. So you're kind of making a bit of what we call frication noise between your lip and your tooth, and then also some voicing noise is what we call it, or just voicing at your vocal folds down here. V. But what happens to voiced consonants in Russian at the end of a word is that they tend to become voiceless. So you lose that bit, v, the vocal fold sound in Russian at the end of a word, and becomes f, just an F, which is the voiceless counterpart of the V. So you can you could transcribe this either with an F at the end, or if you want to get kind of sophisticated about it, you could say it's a V with this voiceless symbol underneath it, saying that normally this sound would be voiced, but in this context, it's losing the voicing and becoming more of an F. And actually, if you go, I'll just put this in the slide here for a second. Sometimes in like really old books, you'll see the name Kyiv like actually written like this with like two Fs at the end, like, from the 1800s or something, when people still thought that Kyiv was a part of Russia or was part of the Russian Empire, that sort of thing. That world is gone, and the spelling is gone too, but you might see it because of that phonetic reason or phonological reason, that this V sound becomes voiceless F at the end of a word. The other symbols in the middle have different phonetic values. So we saw this symbol before. It stood for the barred I in Ukrainian. In Russian, though, it's the E vowel, just like in C or me or so on and so forth. It's written in the IPA with what looks like an I letter in English, but it's pronounced as E, because that's the way most Western European languages write that vowel. What looks like an E to us in the Russian version of Cyrillic is actually pronounced as a ye in Russian. So like the first two sounds of the word yes, ye. So Kyiv. And you kind of, if you go from an E to an E, you kind of get this yod, ya sound in the middle for free. So Kyiv. But that's basically how it's pronounced, whether you are doing the yod intentionally or not. Yeah, so it's not Kyiv, it's Kiev. Yeah, so I mentioned this in the previous slide when I was talking about this, but this the at the end of the word becomes voiceless in Russian at the end of a word, but when it's inside a word, it will be pronounced as a v. So we know that that voicing has to be there somehow. We just it gets lost. And if you really want to learn more about that, you can take a phonology class rather than my phonetics classes. But I've got an example of it not being voiceless, or rather being voiced in the middle of a word. I recorded my wife saying the phrase "in Kiev" in Russian, which sounds like this.
В Киеве. В Киеве.
And this is nice, a nice little example, because the "v" here is actually the word in Russian. The word "in" is just a single consonant, the "v." But if it's by itself next to a voiceless consonant like K, it's going to become voiceless itself. So it's an F being at the end of the word at the beginning, but within a word in the middle of Kyiv here, it is voiced again. So maybe you can hear that if I crank this up enough.
В Киеве. В Киеве.
Sorry that this is not, these are not the best of recordings, but my wife, who's much better looking than me, did not want to appear on video, but she's like, "I'll let you record me." And we just did this like in a living room at home, so it's not high quality recordings, but I think it's good enough to get this point across, that this symbol can represent sort of two different phonetic types of sound that are related to one another, but change according to their environment.
В Киеве.
And you can kind of hear that "ya" bit here, both with the what looks like an E symbol in the middle of this word and the one right after the "v" at the end. I've also got a superscripted yod here next to the K to denote that this is palatalized, is the technical term. So that K at the beginning of Kiev in Russian, your tongue is a bit further forward, ki, like at the sort of highest point of your palate, ki, like we would pronounce the word key in English. We kind of get that for free in English, but what happens with the V at the in the middle of this before the "yeah" is that you raise your tongue towards the highest arch of your palate when you're pronouncing the "v" as well. So at the same time as you're saying this "v" in Kiev, in Kiev, you're actually palatalizing it too. You're raising your tongue to the roof of your mouth, so you get
В Киеве.
"v" sort of at the end. Right, my wife does it a lot better than me.
В Киеве.
В Kyiv, something like that. So another fun fact that I want to just wrap up this video with is that, obviously you naturally sort of associate the Ukrainian language with Ukraine, or Ukraine with the Ukrainian language. But it's that the country's more complicated than that. So many Ukrainians are bilingual in both Ukrainian and Russian. Generally speaking, in the western part of the country, you find more Ukrainian speakers. In the eastern part of the country, you find more Russian speakers, but it's not that simple. My wife comes from the western part of the country. She speaks both Ukrainian and Russian. When she was growing up, she would speak more Ukrainian at home, but she learned Russian at school. And then, I'm not going to get into all the politics of this, but when she went to university, she went to a Ukrainian-speaking university, so she's fluent in both. And generally speaking, and also in university, she learned English. So a lot of the bilingual Ukrainians are trilingual, or have more languages than just three. And that's, what eventually led my wife to Canada and where we met. But the interesting thing is that within the Ukrainian context, where people mostly will speak either Ukrainian and Russian, is that people will speak both, and they can switch back and forth between both languages for different stylistic purposes. And I kind of it's so complicated that I kind of want to address that in a separate video, just to focus on that. But the relationship between the two languages in Ukraine is as fascinating as it is complicated. But a lot of Ukrainians have both languages at their disposal, and they use it for different purposes. And then, they might learn English if they want to go to Canada or something like that, right? The interesting part of this, for just this particular video about the name of this capital city, is that Ukrainians are more likely to speak Ukrainian when they are trying to identify as Ukrainian, as opposed to Russian, or trying to distance themselves from Russia in some respect, which is likely to happen a lot more now that this war is going on. So this fact, though, in recent years, because Ukraine has been moving more towards the EU and the West, and further away from Russia in general in terms of its cultural influence, that has inspired a shift in referring to the country's capital as Kyiv as opposed to Kiev. So if you're confused about why that has been occurring, that's basically the story behind the scenes. However, That being said, both languages form an integral part of the country. Ukraine is a multilingual and multicultural society. It's not all one thing or another. And you kind of have to get a sense of how both or all the different systems work to kind of be a fluent member of that society. Like I said, I've been to Ukraine several times. It's always fun and interesting to go. And it's helpful for me to know a little bit of Russian and a little bit of Ukrainian when I go around and interact with people. And one of the interesting things for me as a linguist is I don't really know enough of either language to have like a deep and meaningful conversation with anybody. But I know enough of the languages to be able to identify like which one is being spoken. They're similar in a lot of ways, but usually when I hear somebody speaking, my first goal is to figure out, okay, which language are they speaking, which takes me a few seconds. And then I kind of know a little bit about that person and like where they're coming from and what they're, so because the language that they're using is saying something on top of like what words they're using to say what they want to say. So when you decide to refer to the capital city of the country as either Kyiv or Kiev, you're using language to make a statement about who you are and what you think is important. And basically, the choice is up to you. In Ukraine, things don't have to be all one way or the other. You have options. So I'm just going to end on that. And like I said, I hope to make another video about this fascinating country and language situation coming up soon.